All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you're working in a small NGO here in Ghana, you know exactly what it's like to manage community projects on a shoestring budget. And more importantly, you know how incredibly crucial it is to actually prove your work is making a real difference. So today, we're going to break down the exact logic you need to show that your project works step by step. We're mapping the results chain.
Now, there's a common saying in our field: monitoring watches the journey, and evaluation judges the destination. But hey, to get anywhere at all, you need a map. And the results chain is literally that map. It's the simple, clear logic connecting what you put in on day one to that huge long-term change you ultimately want to see in your community. Once you can picture this chain clearly, I promise you, everything else, your data, your reports, the whole shebang, gets so much easier to handle.
To make this super practical, we're going to walk through this entire map using one familiar example. Imagine your NGO is running a project to train 200 local farmers across a few communities right here in a local district. The goal? Introduce climate-smart agricultural practices and set up 10 demonstration plots. We'll use this exact scenario to look at all the different stages of our map.
So, here is the core of that map. 5 vital links: inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. Every successful project moves through these 5 steps in a clear, unbroken line. Read them forwards, and you see how your resources eventually turn into major community changes. Read them backwards, and you quickly realize there's absolutely no impact without a change in practice, and no change in practice without those initial resources.
Let's look at the first 2 links. You always start with inputs. Inputs are just the resources you bring to the table. For our farmer project, we're talking about your funding in CETUS, the agronomists you hire, improved seeds, transport to reach the villages, and your training materials. Then, you take those inputs and use them for activities. Activities are the actual doing: training the farmers, setting up the demonstration plots, handing out the seeds. Now, I really need to slow you down here for a second, because this is the exact moment where so many projects just quietly stop and proudly write their reports. We have to understand the difference between immediate, countable products and actual behavior change. The first is your output. 200 farmers trained, 10 plots established. They're what you delivered, and honestly, they're super easy to count. But delivering an output is not the same as creating change. The actual change is your outcome. After the training, do the farmers actually plant on time? Do they space their rows correctly? Are the women adopting these practices just as much as the men? That shift in behavior, that is the outcome. This brings us to the absolutely crucial distinction in this whole explainer. An output is what you delivered, but an outcome is what changed. Hear the difference there? Training 200 farmers is just delivery. It's an output. 200 farmers actually farming differently? That's an outcome. It's the exact same thing if you drill a borehole. The physical borehole is the output, but a community actually drinking safe water every day because the pump is well maintained, that's the outcome. Grasping this really separates a project that just looks busy from a project that actually transforms lives.
So if that outcome holds, meaning our farmers maintain these new climate-smart practices season after season, it builds toward that 5th and final link: impact. Impact is the big, long-term change. Because the farmers change their habits, their maize yields rise, household incomes grow, and food security across the entire district slowly improves. That impact is the literal reason your NGO designed the project in the first place.
Now, you might be wondering, how do we know one step leads to the next? The story that explains that reasoning is called your theory of change. Like, why should training lead to changed practice? Well, we're assuming the farmers will actually show up, right? We assume they'll understand the lessons, get their hands on the improved seed, and actually judge the new method is worth the extra sweat. A really good theory of change states these assumptions out loud instead of just pretending they're absolute certainties. And when you take that entire chain of logic we just talked about, your inputs, outputs, outcomes, and your theory of change, and you package the whole thing into one clean, structured summary table, you get what we call a logical framework, or a log frame. It is a game changer for any NGO because it puts your project levels right next to your indicators, your proof, and those key assumptions we just mentioned. When you actually sit down to read a log frame, you read it from the bottom up, tracking the logic exactly as it plays out in the real world. You start at the base, activities completed on schedule. That pushes up to your outputs, like 200 farmers trained, which leads right to your outcome, measured by the percentage of farmers using correct spacing. And that finally points to the very top, your impact, the real change in yield and income.
And if you look closely, you'll see a column for key assumptions required at every single step of that climb.
So the crucial takeaway here is that this entire chain rests heavily on external assumptions that you just do not control. Think of it as the weather on our journey. The rains actually have to come. The seed must arrive before planting, not 2 weeks after. Market prices have to stay stable, so a bigger harvest truly means more money rather than just a bunch of extra maize that nobody will buy. And, the community must remain settled. A sudden land dispute could literally break your chain overnight.
Naming those assumptions honestly right at the design stage, that is the true hallmark of a serious NGO professional. Because if you confuse an output for an outcome, or if you ignore the harsh realities of the local market and the weather, you are going to end up reporting on mere activities instead of actual lasting change. So as you go back to your own projects and map out your own journeys from inputs to impact, I want to leave you with this to think about. Is the results chain you're funding today built on honest assumptions, or is it just wishful thinking?